Good afternoon, everybody. Sandra Wantege Hart, and as Matt kindly explained, my specialty is in the use of crypto and blockchain infrastructure in delivering humanitarian assistance. So integrating it into programs and existing practice. That's what I do these days. And that came off the back of a long career as a humanitarian responder. And at the tail end of my career, I did a lot of jobs. I was telling Gonzalo, I was like, I did reports, I did M&E, et cetera. But at the tail end, I became a cash and voucher assistance specialist. So delivering payments to people affected by crises. And to grossly oversimplify it, my job was this. Somebody calls you into their office or calls a meeting and says, look, there's been a disaster in this country. 500,000 people urgently need assistance. We want you to go there next flight and figure out how to deliver payments to all of them, ideally within the next 2 months. Never been there, never met them. And so it's tough. It's tough. It's kind of a big task, but there are ways to do it. And the importance of digital payments in the cash space was really a game changer. But it always depends on where you are. So a true story, in the South Pacific island of Vanuatu, which is extremely remote, also known as one of the world's most disaster-prone countries, so there's always something going on all the time. A volcano erupts, everybody's evacuated from their island. I'm with Oxfam, I have to figure out how to deliver cash to everybody. And the only way, after extensive conversations with financial service providers, remittance agencies, et cetera, the only way to do that was with paper checks. And even then, we had to coach kind of the bank through how this was going to go. So the day before distribution on day 1, so I guess this is day 0, the checks have not arrived at the office. So I'm waiting, checks have not arrived at the office. So eventually I was like, okay, screw it. I got on my quad bike, because this is how you travel in the islands, that's my vehicle, drove to the bank, walked into the bank, picked up the box that somebody had just left in a corner, this box full of checks to give to people, threw the box in the back of my quad bike, it's pouring rain, drove like a mad woman to the airport, hop in the plane, take the box with me, get off the plane in Santo, which is 500 kilometers to the north, and then sit down in the sub-office there and hand sign every single check, 2,765 checks to be exact. And I had to do that every month for 6 months. So digital payments are useful. That's lesson number 1, right? But there are still countries today where, we're not even talking about Web3, but there is underdeveloped financial infrastructure. And these are the places where Web3 solutions become very relevant. In my case, doing all of that work over all of these years has taught me a couple of things, right? And there are things that the humanitarian sector does, that we do in designing programs that I think are central to the way that this technology is being adopted, especially in emerging and fragile contexts, right? So rule number 1, context is everything, right? Rule number 2, people have to be at the center of everything that you do, right? Humanitarian, humans, if you don't do that, then you're not doing your job properly. And rule 3, which has also served to be extremely useful, I learned from this crusty old WFP logistician guy. Gonzalo knows who these guys are, And he explained to me, he was like, look, if you want to build an extensive and robust distribution network, what you should do is you should go to the most remote and difficult to access point in your target area and build your distribution network backwards from there, right? And so it's something that keeps coming back in my mind. When we come to digital payments, in these contexts, they were a game changer, they're highly functional, and every time this has happened over the years, it's always because they're less expensive, they're faster, easier to scale rapidly in contexts where it's highly time sensitive. I used to do natural disaster response specifically, so things happen very, very quickly, and needs are acute immediately after this happens. But the conversations about digital payments are often about functionality and features, right? But for somebody like me, what I see is people first and product second. And specifically in these situations, I see people who, in communities, who are in crisis, who are going through an extremely difficult experience. There's anger, there's sadness, there's trauma, there's chaos. Sometimes there's joy, that you're still okay, or that you found your family and they're still alive. And in those moments, when you introduce new ways of making digital payments into those contexts, something really interesting happens. You start to get sort of this blend of user experience and some of the most significant moments in the human experience, these moments of like pain and loss and suffering. So it's at this critical time, and you have to remember that that individual or that family, this is the first time for many people that they're experiencing this technology, and they're coming from that place. It's from that standpoint. And for those of you who have family or have been in some of these situations, people carry those moments for the rest of their life, right? So this timing thing, this context piece, the people who are receiving the technology in the context that they're in is critical. And why? Because people power technology. It's not the other way around, right? Like, we can talk all we want about AI, but at the end of the day, history has told us this, right? People power tech, and technology will evolve in a way that starts to reflect the needs and preferences and context and lifestyle of whoever is using it, right? And that's why context is important. But as if this job, this type of work, wasn't already super difficult, it's made more difficult today, here and now, with emerging tech, Web3, blockchain, crypto, because we have to compensate for a whole legacy of technological development and innovation that has been mostly male and very Eurocentric. So in other words, the people who are program participants in a humanitarian program, the people who are most vulnerable, who lose everything in these situations, have never been part of that process. So how do you use something like that in a context with a user that is completely foreign to the technology, and the technology is completely foreign to the user? And that's probably like the biggest impediment. So when you're doing this work, not only is it urgent, not only do you need to deliver payments, not only do you need to find the right application, you have to adapt it to that context and those users. And so for the humanitarian community, there's a big opportunity, right? So I got to a point maybe a few years ago where I was like, well, this is me in Vanuatu, right, where I do my first blockchain project at like the ends of the earth in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But if we, as the humanitarian community, international NGOs, UN agencies, local partners, this is a sector that is one of the only sectors in the world that has a footprint that far away. There's a local partner. There's a community that trusts the local partner who works with the UN agency or the NGO. And those relationships are important because they stretch so far. That's actually the distribution network. So if we are responding in these places, we have that footprint, we have that presence, and an increasing number of humanitarian organizations are starting to step into digital innovation, the use of blockchain, the use of crypto in programs in order to improve delivery, primarily. But what I try to highlight with my clients is, if you are at the last mile and you know that for decades, everybody at the last mile has been excluded in the creation of the thing that you want them to use, this time around, you better make damn sure that you give them not just assistance, not just money, but an opportunity to participate in the way that this technology is evolving, to put their hands on it, to criticize it, to use it or not use it. That is also a choice. So at that level, participation is key. But also, I sort of hope, that this philosophy that, you're responders, but you're also trying to include people. So inclusion, equitable distribution of assistance, equitable access to technology, safety, localization, These are all buzzwords in the humanitarian sector. These are all priorities in the humanitarian sector. So when we're using this type of technology, those rules still apply. And if you're able to do this, if you're able to do this right, open up these doors to participation, help people understand that if they don't like something, it does still need to be adapted to them. Work with tech companies that understand that place and that language and that context and that culture. Then you're getting to a place where you're increasing the chances for everyone. You're increasing the chances to participate in an economy. You're increasing the possibility of adoption. You're increasing the possibility and the ease of scale. You're getting all of these benefits out of that, but you've got to put in the work, right? You've got to put in the work. You can't just put a device somewhere and let it fly. But going back to what I said earlier, these are moments people carry with them for the rest of their lives. So the question mark is, do you allow them to carry forward the opportunity to sort of participate in this new infrastructure that we're building? Or do we just treat them as subjects and beneficiaries, right? It's a big choice, and I think it's a crucial choice. And it's a burden that the humanitarian community carries on its shoulders, for sure. But, in the interests of that, diversity, localization, I think the more brains you have in the room, the more cultures, the more languages, the more experiences, especially difficult experiences, right? Because the bigger your problems, the better your solutions. When your back is against the wall, that is when innovation happens. It's not happening when you're comfortable, you have everything you need, and that's why I'm not convinced that the ecosystems we have now have fully gotten to that next level of innovation, because most people are not participating. And I think that participation, and we're seeing it here in India, for example, at this conference, that participation is going to drive new levels of innovation, because these are people who live a life that has never been considered by the products currently available in most ecosystems. Not all. But to bring this full circle, when I do this work, I'm working with a variety of actors, and there are a variety of actors that have all considered this in the way that they're contributing to building various ecosystems. So, for example, you need to continue to run an economy so that people can eat, so that people can move from point A to point B while there is a violent and hostile government takeover in a country that has been ravaged by conflict for decades. That's what HisabPay is doing. We have millions of people in the world. I did a very interesting study with MetaMask on adoption in emerging markets. Loads of young people that want to get into the digital asset space. They want to access crypto. They're interested, but they can't. So how do we try and connect, the next billion, or this group of people with this technology, with digital assets, with access to crypto, by connecting with financial tools that are actually available and accessible to them where they are, where they live today and now. That's what OnRamp does. Shandat. And to go back to the original scenario of distribute payments to 500,000 people in 60 days. That is exactly what WFP does. So this is our panel. I tend to dance between all three of these areas. I like to think of myself as building bridges between the three, so that by the end of the day, we have an ecosystem that truly represents the diversity of people on this earth, and that hopefully corrects some of the legacies of inequality that we've seen in the past. So without further ado, shall we start the panel?
Yeah. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Sandra, for setting the scene for our conversation today. My name is Dora Angali. I'm Head of Education and Inclusion at Algorand Foundation. And as we've heard over the past 2 days, financial services have truly gone digital, and especially in developing countries, it has a transformative power. And in regions that are distressed, access to bank accounts is often very hard to come by, but cell phone penetration is very deep. So digital payments have really transformed developing communities and also the aid sector. So we are here today with a powerhouse of experts to discuss how digital blockchain-based payments can transform the delivery of cash aid in distressed regions. And I'm excited to introduce our panelists. You've met Sandra already. Next we have Gonzalo Jimenez from World Food Program in Afghanistan. He also has a background as an entrepreneur in the tech sector. Then we have Chandan Kumar. He's the co-founder of OnRamp.money, has a background as a traditional trader, and will tell us more about how OnRamp works. And last but not least, we have Nigel Pond. He's advisor to the chairman at HesabPay and comes with decades of experience working with Mercy Corps and other organizations. And I'm proud that Algorand Foundation decided to make a strategic investment into HesabPay to really help accelerate the growth for HesabPay in Afghanistan and beyond. So before we dive in, most of us here, we have absolutely no clue what it is like to work in these regions and to deliver aid. If each of you could just give maybe a short, like a boots on the ground story, an example, and also add a little bit more color to your profile. Maybe Nigel, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Dora, and thank you to the Algorand Foundation for this investment and this partnership. You know, obviously the resources are fantastic. Well, you know, welcome that. But the ecosystem that we're working in, there's a lot of complexity with many different stakeholders. So this sort of long partnership with the foundation and all the relationships and the expertise that you bring is really going to help us grow and deliver on the potential. So we're really looking forward to the next phase of our relationship with the foundation. Me personally, I've been a humanitarian for more than 30 years. I started my career in Afghanistan in '93, just at the end of the civil, actually in the middle of the civil war there. And I've been working there on and off for the last 30 years in different countries in between. I first started working on cash during the previous Taliban regime when everybody was handing out stuff. And it was amazing how it transformed the nature of your relationship with recipients. And I talked last night about sort of dignity and the power of choice that cash provides. And that struck me then, and it struck me again when responding to the Indonesian tsunami. I was in Aceh 2 days after the tsunami in January of 2004, and trying to figure out how do we restart and help this community recover. And everybody else was saying we need to give them stuff, and we started to give them cash, and it transformed things. So fast forward to the future, and modern-day Afghanistan, which is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, and Gonzo and others are at the heart of that. Afghanistan has seen this shift from in-kind to cash wherever possible, but digital cash, mobile money, has never worked in Afghanistan. There have been extensive efforts funded by USAID and other donors for years to bring mobile money to Afghanistan. People looked at what had happened in East Africa with the ecosystem that M-Pesa had built there, and it's like, why this is perfect for Afghanistan? Why? But a combination of factors, which I won't get into, meant that over the previous however many decade and a half, mobile money never really took off in Afghanistan. But what we've done at HesabPay is, while building on Algorand, without having to deal with many of these sort of intermediary institutions, which were some of the obstacles, just using the internet as infrastructure, we have put wallets into the hands of 400,000 Afghans so far, and a lot of those are women. And one story, Doro, that you said. So one of the key things is when there's a narrative in a country that mobile money just doesn't work in Afghanistan, you ask anybody, and they say, oh, you can't do digital here, people don't have phones, they're illiterate, it's not going to work here. That was the prevailing narrative. So we said, we need to prove that wrong. And so we worked with the London School of Economics to develop a randomized controlled trial where we did a really rigorous experiment where through HesabPay we provided 2,500 Afghan women who are all at the lowest socioeconomic status, a lot of them widows, a lot of female-headed households, very low literacy. None of them previously had any form of financial account or inclusion. And we made regular payments to them over a several-month period, and LSE did the research on the back of it. And what that research told us at the end was that 90% of these women, they were able to maintain agency over their funds. They could choose what to do with it, where to spend it, what to spend it on, and when to spend it. So they could choose where and when they wanted to go anywhere. And they said that they didn't have to stand in these queues forever. And so I think, sort of going back to some of these points, and one that Sandra made, we're dealing with people in an incredibly vulnerable part of their lives. They've experienced incredible trauma, and there's a real burden on us to provide the most dignified experience possible. If you imagine yourself having gone through some of these experiences, what you really, if you're in a pretty knocked down state, you want to have a dignified experience as possible. And if you get money on your phone, that you can choose when, where, and how to spend. That is a huge step forward in dignity in humanitarian assistance. So that's something we've done recently. We've proved it can be done in Afghanistan, and we're looking forward to scaling that.
Thank you.
I come from a Wall Street background. I studied oil futures. And many years ago, after the Ethereum ICO, I attended a meetup in Bangalore. After the meetup, I read up the Wikipedia article on blockchain and Bitcoin. And immediately I was sold. Like within a year, I moved to entirely to crypto. And we also run an exchange in India, which has a bank account. Users deposit money into that. So we realized the issues around banking, etc. And gradually, we saw many things happening. Like Web3 projects started off with saying that we only Web3, we want only crypto, right? Then we saw Aave integrating fiat on-ramp on the UI, Uniswap doing that as well. And the other big trend which we saw, especially in India, was like India went from 0 smartphones to 800 million smartphones, right? So practically every Indian adult has a phone, and every Indian adult has a UPI account, because every bank account is linked with the UPI, right? And that kind of replaced, like, we didn't need Visa, MasterCard. So every street vendor has a UPI account. You can pay anywhere, like even 1 rupee, right? It's free of cost again. So those were the big trends which we saw. And once we saw wallets move to mobile apps, right? So again, we saw the game repeating over there, that gradually wallets were probably moved from browser extensions into apps, which meant that more of the user experience would be inside the app, right? Rather than within the browser with an extension being an outlier, right? So that meant that fiat on-ramp would go into that again. Then we had the banking layer. So India already had proven that instant banking works even as a monetary layer, etc. So multiple things, and as an Indian, we experienced that viscerally. So we could anticipate that it would extend to other parts of the globe as well. So that's the basis for on-ramp money. So we are live in around 18 geographies, including the Eurozone as one geography, again. The EA countries, again. So again, started off with on-ramp, which is allowing users to buy crypto using the banking layer, lowest fees, again. Move crypto into the wallet without having to go through exchanges, right? Gradually, the other opportunity which organically we started seeing was off-ramp again. So we had these Web3 folk who wanted to move money back into their bank account. So they were earning money in USDT, USDC, etc. They wanted to move money back into the bank account, right? And once we started off-ramp in India, on around half of the days, we see off-ramp volume exceeds on-ramp volumes. So we discussed this in the Hyderabad event. Ryan was there. And Algorand Foundation is investor number 1 again. So glad to have the belief in us again. And at the time, we were live only in India. Now we're live in around 18 countries. And off-ramp is a big game. So Sandra and I were having a chat. So one of the projects which is going live with us in India is It allows Indian women to do micro work in any geography in the world. They receive crypto payments in the wallet, which can be as small as $1, 1 USDT again. And many of them want to off-ramp even at 1 USDT, right? Because that's the earning for the day again. So that can happen once that integration goes live. That can happen within the app itself, right? So the user experience is very smooth. And many countries have the infrastructure which allows this micro work, micro transfers, micro off-ramp, etc. Because the instant banking is extremely low cost in many countries. So off-ramp is again a huge opportunity for us. So we are building the infra layer effectively. So the international layer would be on blockchain, which is much more efficient for remittances across borders. Whereas for the local layer, we still feel that at least for a decade or so, the instant banking layer in each country, or in some countries, it could be mobile wallets like Africa. In some countries, it could even be airtime, exchange of airtimes, etc. Right? So that layer is extremely powerful. And that's probably more efficient as compared to the blockchain layer. So we're trying to bridge the two. And like I'm a sci-fi fan, so if you've seen the show Expanse, right? So it's about it's about how humans move to Mars and the Jovian moons. Right? It's not about interstellar travel again. So before we go to interstellar, we probably will do interplanetary. So that's the phase we are at right now, I think. And we hope to bridge the Web 2, Web 3 world. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, so my name is Gonzalo, and I would like to give you a bit more color of what is to work as a humanitarian, specifically in Afghanistan. We have a presentation, if we can show it. So basically, it's a Sunday morning, right? You wake up and, oh, there is an earthquake. And you think, well, it was a 6.5, maybe it was not that bad. But in Afghanistan, in the rural areas, most of the houses are basically mud houses, right? So what happens is that everything is flattened. So, okay, this is not exclusive to Afghanistan, right? They don't hold monopoly on disasters. So what is different? We're working there trying to understand what is needed, what is the best way to assist. And then you start noticing something. You don't see women. You don't see women around. So you decide to go and talk to the local authorities. You are placed in a waiting room where there are 20 security guys for the local authority. In this tiny room, you sit next to them. All of them wearing their long-range guns. Then you start talking to the authorities, and you ask, what's going on? Where are the women? And they say, no, they have to stay in their houses. And then you ask, okay, what happened if some of the husbands were affected by this event? Well, they need to find someone, another man, that can go and collect their assistance for them. And say, okay, and why cannot them go to collect their assistance? And the authorities will tell you, well, that is not right, that is haram. But that's one of the challenges, right? It's very difficult. Now, why I'm talking about this? Now, one of the ways of providing assistance that the humanitarians have is to provide in-kind food, right? But this is an earthquake, people lose their kitchens. They don't have where to cook, and they also lost their utensils. So maybe giving food for them to try to cook is not the best idea. Okay, so we can give cash. But the markets are not there. Actually, one of the pictures that we saw before it used to be one shop that used to sell around $10 a day. So the nearest functioning market is between 1 or 3 hours drive. So if we give cash, the people will need to go and try to collect this and bring it back home on top of all the challenges they are facing, right? So a solution is to put, why not to bring the market and the shop into the affected areas. And as humanitarians, we have the influence to enable this to happen, right? So now we're bringing people not only food, but also some utensils. Winter is coming, so those are some heaters on top, the orange things. So people can choose what they need to prioritize with the cash that we're giving, right? And then you maybe end up with a cute, happy family that despite of all of these events, they are now looking into a better next day. Now, what is the connection with what we are doing today here and the impact? Is that we could do all of this with a digital payment solution. We are giving cash to the people, cash in hand, because there is no alternative. Those places do not have electricity, do not have connectivity, do not have markets. But we can create the markets with the assistance we're providing, and we can bring the digital payment solutions. So we can work with private solutions, also running in blockchain, like Hepsa Pay, to these places, and we dream that we can kickstart an economy activity that can maybe last and stay there. Once people resume their livelihoods, they receive remittances from their families abroad, etc. I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nigel, you mentioned earlier mobile money or mobile payments. Can you explain what are the advantages of blockchain-based payments, and why does mobile money work less well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the nature of micropayments, these are tiny payments in these environments, and fees can get super high. And traditionally, there's a lot of intermediaries because regulation is not streamlined, it's very messy, and there's a lot of different regulatory bodies and switches and banks and everything involved. And we're cutting a lot of that out of the system. And it's one of the beauties of Algorand is, these very predictable transaction fees and super fast transaction times, which allows us to sort of do microtransaction. Very few chains are actually built so that you can do that. So I think that, we don't want to claim that this, Hisab Pay at its core is a good mobile money solution, and mobile money solutions exist all over the world without using blockchain. Yeah. But there's all sorts of other infrastructure that exists in those environments that means you don't need a blockchain. But the fact that we don't have all that other infrastructure means that we have a particular advantage in Afghanistan, or in this sort of type of context where the only infrastructure really is the internet, or as Gonzo says, sort of in some parts, obviously you don't even have that. But the question, we were having a conversation, if we're able to bring the internet to that village, yeah, then suddenly Hisab Pay works, and you can do that. And I think the other thing that'll work differently, and it doesn't work in Afghanistan where crypto per se is banned, blockchain is not banned, but crypto is banned, is that you can start to make cross-border payments. And this gets to the question of remittances. And aid flows into a country are huge, but remittance flows are bigger. And if we can make remittances cheaper, faster, that's gonna make a huge difference. And so that's one of the sort of the key use cases we see in the future.
Thank you. Sandra, you mentioned the Unlocked Cash project, and you're sitting on the beach and thinking about how can you get the money to the people. Maybe in 1 minute, can you explain how that works technically in bare bones concepts, like how does it work on blockchain to get the funds from A to B?
Yeah. The best way to describe it, it's a voucherized platform. It's a closed loop system. But because the payments, we can process micropayments very cheaply and very quickly, one of the benefits of that system in countries where the majority of the economy is informal is that you're finally able to include these tiny, tiny, tiny little vendors in programs to help sort of like a whole microeconomy recover. as opposed to maybe just working with big grocery stores or people who can wait a month to get paid back. It was originally built on Ethereum, migrated to Celo, and depending on the context, we either are tokenizing the local currency and holding collateral in a trust account. So in the case of Vanuatu, crypto was illegal, but the Reserve Bank agreed for us to be able to tokenize, report every month that the collateral equaled digital tokens. In Venezuela and Zimbabwe, it was run using CUSD. So USD stablecoins, very useful in those two contexts because they're hyperinflationary. So big challenge for cash assistance. How do you help people with cash if the currency is constantly depreciating? And so individuals in the system are given an NFC card, or if they already have a phone, they download the app. Phone to peer-to-peer transfers are possible. So if you're enrolled and I'm enrolled, we can make transfers to each other. Local merchants are provided with smartphones and onboarded to the system and can also pay each other and accept payments from people enrolled in the program. And where it gets really interesting is that vendors can cash out other vendors, right? So you can sort of create this whole informal off-ramp network and ultimately minimize the number of payments and the cost of payments that you have to settle in a bank account of those vendors. So finally, the people using the system don't need a bank account. The vendors can have a bank account, but they don't need a bank account if they can cash out at their neighborhood grocery store. And that makes it very flexible and very well adapted to informal economies where everybody's been affected. And the tiniest businesses are also the most vulnerable businesses, and bringing them back online is really critical to economic recovery. So yeah, it's evolved a lot. It's been 6 countries so far, and every country sort of there's a different iteration and evolution.
Thank you. Yeah. So one big issue with delivering aid digitally is obviously KYC, and you mentioned you operated sort of in a closed room system. Chandler, a question for you. Can you talk a little bit more about KYC processes? Because a lot of aid organizations are worried about the abuse of funds or double dipping and other issues. How does that work, for example, on on-ramp money, and where do you see that going forward?
So like with the banking layer, we have to enable the modes which the users are used to in each geography, right? So in India, it's UPI and IMPS. Every country has an alternative now. Almost every country has an alternative. On the KYC as well, in countries like India, we don't have a document upload flow. It's a OTP-based flow where the user details are validated against the government records itself. So the user enters the OTP details, enters the OVD numbers, then enter the OTP details. The government authorized vendor is able to download the data from the government servers based on that OTP again. The OTP goes to the primary registered mobile number of the user, not to the number they enter on the screen, right? So there's a link already based on the OVD numbers. So it's a very smart system. It takes under a minute. And Turkey has an NFC-based flow, eKYC, which also works really well. So again, because we work closely with the banks, we necessarily have to use the local eKYC because many banks require that. And what we realize is that these local KYCs are much more efficient as well as compared to the international KYC, which required the upload of the document. So at least our play here is to go to each country, localize the banking layer as well as the eKYC layer. And in some countries, it could just mean a basic document upload. The other approach, what we've done is a mobile number is a primary identifier, not email ID, because email ID can potentially be anonymous. Mobile number in most countries are backed by an ID, right? Identity. It's not easy to get burner phones in most countries of the world. So that allows us to start off the user with small limits using only the mobile number. So in many countries, the user can just log in with a mobile number and they get a small limit. It could be $100, $150 instantly. Once they've experienced the product, they can upgrade the KYC tier and get higher limits, etc. So again, it's all local. Like we have to ensure that we follow the local best practices of each geography. Like only then we can see the mass adoption.
Thank you. Yeah. Question for Gonzo. You mentioned earlier you were in the room with the authorities with guns. I'm trying to imagine a conversation about blockchain-based payments with those authorities. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working with local governments and regulatory bodies, and the others can please add to that as well.
I think the key word around talking with the authorities in a country like Afghanistan is patience. You have to be very patient. They have their ways and their pride, and they want to do things in a certain way, right? And the leverage against that is quite minimum. You might think because humanitarian presence in that country is big, you have some leverage, but no, you really don't have it. So you have to be patient, and you can, through a conversation, trying to recognize where they're coming from, what are their priorities, and trying to align yours with them, with those, you can achieve certain things. I just want to add a couple of things. So in the conversation about women, right, what we ended up discovering with solutions like Heads Up Pay is that we create invisibility for the people receiving the assistance, which in this case for women is key. Instead of having the woman coming or traveling to a distribution point, we can top up the assistance for them to receive it at home. And then they can decide when and where to go, as you were saying. The key challenge is that the merchant of networks, the network of merchants is available, right? So they can actually use the assistance. So I just want to finish saying, let's not forget the impact. It is simple, but it's important for people to actually fly under the radar and achieve what they need to, buy what they need through these solutions, and providing them with the dignity and independence that maybe they don't get when we act on a more traditional way by giving cash.
Thank you. You mentioned flying under the radar. Sandra, you mentioned, but giving some people access to smartphones. So what measures need to be put into place for actually onboarding communities in distressed regions?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of this has been done for years in normal cash programs, right? You're used to people not having ID. It's very common. You're used to targeting, identifying, registering, verifying people. So there are a lot of processes that already exist that sort of give you the practice needed and the expertise to be able to do that onboarding. But I think what is coming out in my work, especially, is that humanitarian organizations do also have to upskill. I think it's important to accept that if we want to do digital payments, and we know there's a digital divide, and we don't want to make it deeper, and we don't want to make it wider, that means that you do have to have teams that know not just how to give smartphones to people, but how to train them on how to use them, right? So Oxfam originally gave out the smartphones with the app already downloaded to everybody before realizing, 2 weeks in, that nobody knew how to use the phone. Nobody knew how to connect to the network. Nobody knew how to turn it on and turn it off or close the app. And what happens in those cases, also very common, is that you see the role of youth. Today's youth, they will train their mom, they'll train their grandma, they'll train their auntie who owns the shop on how to use these phones. So it sort of creates these completely different areas of programming or accompanying programming around digital inclusion, digital literacy, but also youth empowerment as a tool to be able to do that in those contexts at a cost that's not, exorbitant. So there are ways to do it, but I think that organizations do also have to build up new capacities. In a way, it's very similar to when humanitarian organizations started delivering cash. You have to build a whole new set of skills to make sure that you can do this well. So Unblock Cash has a toolkit that country offices use. That's why they've been able to replicate country by country. And depending on the context, the way that you identify people also matters, right? So this question around invisibility, I think, is really important because there are contexts where invisibility is critical. You are protecting people's identities for a reason. You know, do no harm is a thing. So a project that I work on in Myanmar, where there's a military junta that has taken over the country and that has been disappearing and killing and locking up villagers and civil society, international NGOs can't access their bank accounts. The authorities announced the other day that they're going to seize all transaction data for any sort of foreign currency transaction or cross-border transaction coming into the country and hand it over to the secret police. So in this case, the anonymity of an on-chain solution is absolutely critical. Everybody who's cashing in, cashing out, accessing it, it has to be as low profile as possible. And that's something that this technology gives us that we didn't have before, you know, in terms of how to operate. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that concept also of the ripple effect of like people then learning how to use a phone. They learn how money is transferred. They're teaching other people how to use the phone. You know, it all has little, the circles are expanding around. That's really great. I see a big red times up in the corner of my eye. So, you know, speaking of ripple effects and how the space evolves moving forward, can each of you maybe in 30 seconds tell us how do you see the space progressing and what are your hopes for online payments in the humanitarian aid context? And Nigel, do you want to start? We'll just go down.
Cross-border payments, I think if we can start doing large-scale cross-border payments and moving, you know, cash that way, that's going to be huge in the future. I think there's an identity piece, a lot of discussion around identity over the last days, but, you know, it's this critical thing. Just been fascinating here in India, like the role that this sort of the identity piece has played in this explosion of financial services here. So I think that's going to be huge. And then related to that, sort of aid and remittances, if we can get all those pieces working, we can really transform it, but there's a compliance web to untangle first.
Thank you. Jenna.
So I think remittances is one angle. Like once we have the efficient cross-border blockchain layer with local banking on-ramp and off-ramp rails, right? Number of applications can be built on that. Like remittance is obvious use case. US to India is UAE to India, US to India, etc. The other flow which is possible is international merchant flows using crypto, right? So let's say you have a simple merchant widget. US company wants to onboard Indian users, right? At the back end you have crypto again. Local banking layers on both sides in fiat, user and merchant. So I think blockchain is becoming more and more like the infra layer, and applications are going to be built on that. Like once we have the infra in place, we'll see a number of applications explode over time.
Thank you.
I think for humanitarians is the last mile. We have a large presence in multiple contexts. In Afghanistan only, we are reaching 6 million people every year. So working together with the private sector and the people we serve to expand, for example, the merchant network is key to enable these solutions to work.
Okay, thank you. Sandra.
Yeah, I think there are sort of like three trends that I see. One of them is that one of the biggest challenges the humanitarian sector faces that needs to be solved for this to be scalable is institutionalization. So we're dealing with a lot of old school bureaucracies. You know, people's jobs are threatened. It's difficult to change the way these paper systems or old systems operate. And using this technology has started to challenge some of those systems. So intra-institutional transfer of funds is something that organizations will need to figure out, how to hold their own wallets, how to basically transfer funds digitally from the top to the bottom. That hasn't quite happened yet, but it's happening. The second thing that I think is necessary but is coming together is creating a community of practice. A lot of reasons that I've heard from colleagues on why they're not interested in blockchain or crypto is because there are no learning resources. You can't find all the reports in the same place. You can't see any evidence of how well it worked here or there. It's not consistent. It's not standardized. You can't learn how to use this technology in the humanitarian context. There's no training course, right? And there isn't even like a roster of service providers per country or per region that could be useful to this community. So I think that needs to be put in place to get more people on board. And the last one, and probably the most important one, is that there has long been a divide between the financial inclusion space and the cash transfer space. Nobody's figured out how to bridge that. But with DeFi products, you actually can. So you can be delivering cash and potentially delivering financial inclusion at the same time because you have an integrated set of services in a single application that operates on very lightweight infrastructure. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm hoping it will.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of our academy that we are building at Algorand with the UNDP. That's what we're doing, right? We're training UNDP country officers on how to implement blockchain solutions. And also the next stage of like real financial inclusion is not just payments, but then also enabling and empowering aid recipients to then go the next step and empower them financially. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and your stories from the ground. I appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for making the time. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.